Thank you for joining Darien Library this Monday evening to learn the art of modern calligraphy. Debby Reelitz is a professional calligrapher in North Granby, Connecticut. Introduced to calligraphy by her fifth grade teacher, she dabbled for years, and in 1998, she opened her own calligraphy studio in Chicago. Before we begin, I would like to mention that programs at Darien Library are made possible by our annual Friends of the Library campaign. We thank you for your support to make programs like this, as well as our collections, available to the community. I hope everyone is ready to practice their penmanship. Debbie, take it away.
Great. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to spend the evening with you guys, because I was lucky enough that my fifth grade teacher was part of the Friday afternoon programs that our elementary school did, and they figured kids aren't paying attention anyway, so they had fun activities for us to do for 6 weeks. I remember doing macrame and soccer and calligraphy, and one of them stuck. So I'm really thrilled to be able to share that, because I'm a huge believer that once somebody knows how to hold a pencil, they're perfectly capable of learning, starting to learn calligraphy. And it becomes a process of actually enjoying the writing that comes with the language that we naturally have in it. And one of the things I especially love about the handwriting is that it's a way to make a human connection. You know, it's one thing to hit print. You know, we're all familiar with the printers and the lasers and all that stuff. But if you get something in the mail, something handwritten versus something printed, there's just something really special when you know somebody took the time to do something by hand. And that's where we've got the communication down in our society, but the connection that comes with giving a little piece of yourself out into the world, a computer can't match that. And so I'm really thrilled that you guys are joining me on a handwriting journey tonight. So most of you, it sounds like, were with me when we had the computer issues on Zoom. I had no idea that I was talking to a dead line, so my apologies on that. But so I'm not going to go through my whole intro that we did last time. We're going to dive in more straight away into the lettering for the class tonight. So just a quick review. There are different ways you can do the modern calligraphy. One is you can just draw it. So when your brush marker wears out, and if you don't want to buy another one, you can simply pick up a pencil and you can draw the modern calligraphy and do all sorts of fun things with it. You can, paint inside of it. You can use a highlighter with it. You can draw dots around it. You can use colored pencils with it. There's all sorts of things you can do, even if you just draw the modern calligraphy. So this is always the backup if you feel like, I want to do some, but my marker died. You've always got the pencil as your other option. Another thing that works really well is this is a Cartridge Brush where there's literally color inside the barrel here, and it comes out through the brush. The nice thing about this is that this one's about 10 years old and probably even older than that. And so once the color wore out, I just simply use it as a pointed brush. And so I can paint gold paint with it, or watercolor or gouache, or I can use an ink. I can use this for all sorts of different things, which of course means that, and I don't think I have it out with me, and this one's tiny, but you can just use a pointed brush. Obviously this one's teeny tiny, but you can use but that's a good example, is that you can use something itty bitty for your writing, or you can use a big brush if you're doing a sign, you know. I've certainly used big brushes over the years. That's where that was done with the big brush. And so, but you can also, if you're doing like an envelope or a place card, you want to do something special for your family on Thanksgiving, you can do something really tiny with a tiny brush. So the skill and the lettering you're using can go across several different tools that you can use. I saw somebody ask for a brand. This brush in particular is called Pentel. It's a Pentel color brush that's out there. And there's a calligraphy supplier called John Neal Books that has these available in a lot of different colors out there. Your Tombow marker is also available at John Neal Book. You could also find, this one's probably the easiest to find. You can find it at like Michael's, any kind of craft store. All right, and your pointed brushes are, again, any kind of craft or art store. You'll find that there. All right, so the big thing to remember about the modern calligraphy that we're going to talk about is that on the downstroke, because normally when we write, you know, we've got loops and circles and things like that. We go up and we go down with our letter strokes. The most basic thing to remember is that on the downstroke, you press, and on the upstroke, you release. You like float on the paper. So that's what happened on these lettering. Yeah, it's too yellow, it's probably too hard to see. But on the downstroke, you press down. On the upstroke, you press up. So there's three kind of big skills that we combine in order to do the modern calligraphy. One, we do the full pressure stroke. I call it the float stroke or the no pressure stroke. And then the third skill is going to be the transition. So our first activity, we're first going to just focus on the full pressure and the no pressure. We're going to play with those concepts before we go into a transition stroke. Because again, you know, when you're building a skill and you're trying something new, don't try the hardest thing first. So we're going to start with the two simplest strokes. And even then you'll discover that maybe they're not so simple. So just be patient, because it's always something that just takes time and practice to get used to it. And this is no different at all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change screen so that way you can see my hands and you can see the lettering. If you do have a question, please feel free to unmute and just ask it out loud. It looks like Amanda's here. She can, if there's a question that comes up in the chat, sometimes I don't see it because I'm looking down at the board, but hopefully Amanda can help us if there's something that pops up and that I don't see. All right, excellent. All right, so let me just change cameras here. All right. Okay, so we talked about that there's going to be two skills that we're going to do first off. Okay, and one is the full pressure stroke and the other is the no pressure stroke. So we've got the full pressure, and I think we talked about how to hold the pencil or pen last time. I'm a big fan of the good old traditional one boss system, okay, where you've got your pointer is the one boss. Your thumb is just a balancing point. All right, that's like your fulcrum. And then this, your middle finger, is just a resting point. I'm a huge fan of the traditional good old fashioned thing. I know they don't teach it very much anymore, but most of us would not want to have a lot of bosses. Same thing for your pen, okay? So a lot of the times when we hold it, most of the time when we hold the pen, we are going to be pointing to the left side, slightly to the upper corner. Not by much, but a little bit to the upper corner. When I do a full pressure stroke, I'm going to fully press down, press, and then release, okay? So I have a definitive end, definitive beginning, and a definitive end for my strokes. So I want to press down. If I do it while I'm kind of doing a running stroke, if I'm not deliberate about where I start and where I end, I'm going to get these funny kind of tapers. Okay, so part of it is I want to have a defined beginning and a defined end. So that's our full pressure stroke. That's what we're first going to start with. The other, we're going to do two of them. The other stroke is where I'm going to point my, if you saw, I kind of point my brush more upright. So that way I'm going to be more at the tip of the marker, and I'm just floating. I want to see how light and delicate I can make my strokes. Okay, I want to just circle and do some light, delicate strokes. So what I want you to do is on one of your scrap pieces of paper is do several full pressure strokes where you've got a clean beginning and a clean end. Do several of those, and then just fill the page where you're floating as light as you possibly can on the paper. All right, so I'm going to shift to get out a fresh piece of paper, and we're going to create just a casual little border that we're going to set aside, and then we're going to come back to. All right, so I'm just going to do several full pressure strokes up at the top of my paper. And then I'm just going to do some float strokes connecting them, almost like not as formal or as a music bar, but we're going to just draw some lines. So just spend a few seconds and just create a little border at the top of your paper. Okay. So now I'm going to set this aside because I'm going to come back to that. All right. So the next thing I want you to pull out is you can pull out one of your set of guidelines. If you don't have guidelines, it's okay. You can still just use a blank piece of paper. Or if you only have one set of guidelines, you can even put a piece of paper on top of it, and then you can see your guidelines through it. That's always a good strategy as another way to handle it. Okay. All right, so then the other thing that you guys need is your capitals. You've got two exemplars. You've got one that is of your capital letters, and then you have another one with lowercase. We're going to start off with the capital letters. All right. So this alphabet is designed to build skills. All right. It's designed as a way to practice and develop control with the tool. I'm not a big fan of trying to do all the skills at once. So I really prefer to just add layers. All right. So the layer that we're going to do here is taking our full pressure strokes and then combining with them with no pressure strokes. Okay, so the first and easiest one is to just start with the I, where I'm going full pressure, where a very defined start and a defined end, and then a no pressure for the top and bottom. All right, these are pretty straightforward. I want you to practice A through T on this exemplar. All right. I'm going to be going through that too. So if you want to watch, you can, but if you want to be lettering, that's awesome. It's possible that this one has two sides.
Okay.
Are you?
I don't have.
Yours doesn't have two sides. Okay. Sometimes what happens is that when they're brand new, they're a little bit stiffer, and so they're not quite as flexible. So it's possible that this is a little bit stiffer, but again, it's also possible that you have one that is smaller. And the skills are all the same with it. So if you have a smaller brush, which, yeah, I think you do, what you can do is, if you want to give yourself something different, is you can draw a guideline, like, 2/3 the way, and then just use a smaller writing space for your letters. Does that make sense?
Yep. Thanks.
Yep. Good question. Thank you. Yeah, I find I have to use the big marker for demonstration purposes. So
definitely makes sense. I was not sure whether I was doing something wrong, but
yeah. No, that's really good to clarify that. Because what's nice about the smaller brush marker is that you're going to be able to use it in a lot of places. You'll be able to use it in place cards or notes to family, or, it'll be a little bit more flexible than when you have a really large tool. Yes, so what's the guideline is actually designed for the X represents what's called the X height. It's a calligraphy terminology. And so the height of the lowercase x is also the lowercase a or n or m. Now, with you guys having the smaller brush, you really are probably your capital probably should fill just this area between the X height. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Does that look a little more proportional than where my capitals are above and above it? Yeah, for your smaller brush, in between the X height, in between that X lines would be better for you guys. Okay, so I want to keep you guys moving. So I'm going to go into some of the other letters. So on the next set of letters, okay, we have the diagonals. And you'll notice that as on the diagonals, I've got little, almost, it's like a drawing of the pen. Okay. What happens is that as we do the diagonals, I need to change my pen angle. Most of the time we've been pointing towards the, I'll go over here, towards the left side, upwards just a little bit in order to do a straight up and down line. If I keep that angle on the diagonal, see how much thinner it is? This is thick, but because I didn't change my pen angle, it's hard to get a matching thick on it. So what I need to do when I do my diagonal letters is I'm actually going to point, I'm still pointing to the left side, but now I'm pointing downwards. So you'll see that that little arrow points downwards. So I have full pressure and then fully lift up. But now, let's see here, I can get this in the camera. So that was the same thickness. I couldn't get the same thickness, but because I changed my pen angle, I can get a matching thickness. So again, most of my time, my pen's been pointing to the left side. For the diagonals, I'm shifted and pointed downward to the left, down towards my left corner. And then I just go up on my tip to do the thin. The V, I point downwards, go up on my tip, and do a fun float stroke. So the X, same thing. The Z, now we have to go the opposite direction. So for the Z, if I do my diagonal this way, I'm going to get a thin. Okay, so now I really need to point strongly upwards to the top for the diagonal of the Z. And then I can go back in and add my thin strokes with it. Okay. So for my diagonal, I point strongly towards that upper left corner, make my diagonal, and then there's all sorts of ways to make those connecting. Okay, so, and what I'd recommend doing is, let me talk about the U. We've got the U where we've got our thin stroke, our thick stroke. I'm going to float up. You can either make it all thin, or you can make it like the H, where I've got thin, thin going into a thick on the other side. So make words. So for the U, I'm coming down. This does introduce a little bit of that taper. I can keep it all thin on the other side, or I can do thick, taper, thin. I can do another thick if I want. Okay. What I'd recommend doing is create words with what you have. You have for vowels, you have A, I, and U. I want to play with, making some words before we do those taper letters. But it's really important, once you've done the letter once or twice, to start working in words, because if you only work in individual letters, you don't get practice on putting the letters next to each other. And that's a really important skill that's very hard to teach, because there's just so many different potential letter combinations. So it's important that you're practicing putting letters next to each other. All right. So now that you've been playing a little bit with words, we want to finish the rest of the alphabet, right? So the last few letters of the alphabet all have a little bit of a taper in them. Okay, so this is, remember we talked about the 3 different skills. We had the full pressure, the no pressure, or the float stroke, and then we have the taper. Okay, on the U, you did a little bit of a taper. Now we're going to do more letters that practice that taper. So like on the letter J, we have a full pressure. I'm lifting up so that way I get a taper coming down. So I've got a full pressure. I'm lifting up. And then I'm up on the float stroke. The S, there's a couple different ways you can do it. On the exemplar, we're floating. We start with a float, and then I get that second curve, and I'm going to taper, add pressure, and then taper again. Another way to do it, sometimes starting with a floating stroke is challenging. So another way to do it is where we press, taper, taper, press, taper. So that's another way to do the S, where you have 2 pressure strokes. It's a little more challenging because you do have 2 tapers. Okay. So the Y is a play on the U. We've got our full pressure, taper, coming up, full pressure, just like the J, where I'm releasing with it and coming across. And that's the fun thing too, is that once you get these 3 skills of the pressure, no pressure, and the taper stroke, you can go on the internet and look up modern calligraphy or look up hand lettering, and you'll find lots and lots and lots of variations out there. So the fun thing is that once you get the skills and understand what the basic principles are, that you can really start playing with it. Yeah, so the other Y was like the diagonal, right? That was the one you didn't like as much. It's one of the things I love, is that there's always so many variations. All right, so let's talk about the round letters. The C, the E can either be done like the F, where it's geometric, or it can be done like the C. So our base letter for these curves is where we are pointing up towards that left corner. I'm going to do a full pressure. I'm going to taper it and then come out with no pressure. I'll give it a little, I don't know, what do you want to call that? Little mark at the beginning. And then I can turn this C into several different letters. I can turn, so now I'm going to do that C again. And I'm going to turn it into a G. And this is why I don't want you to practice any one letter more than 2 times. Because as you can see, I'm practicing those same skills as I go through the alphabet. All right. So it's not where I have to be constantly doing, I got to get the C before I can do the G. No, just keep developing and moving on to the next letter, because one, I don't want you to get bored. And if you're doing 10 of the same letter, that's a really good recipe for getting bored, which is not what the lettering is about. All right, so we've had a chance to try. Hopefully you've touched all the different letters of the alphabet in the capitals. Now I want you to pull that piece of paper out where you created a little border. Right? So we made this little border at the beginning before we started moving into the capital letters. All right, so how many of you guys remember what is special about this sentence? The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. It's got a special funny term. It's called a pangram, which means all the letters of the alphabet are in one sentence. And I realized how brilliant the quick brown fox is when I actually gave the assignment to one of my classes and said, write your own pangram, which meant that I had to try writing my own pangram. And it made me realize how amazingly brilliant that sentence is and how few letters it repeats. So what I want you to do underneath this lovely little border that you've made, I want you to write your pangram. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. All right. So that's what we're going to write underneath our border. And one of the things to always keep in mind when you're learning something new, and calligraphy is no different, is that going slow is actually a faster way to learn. So even though this looks like a really fast lettering style, you don't have to do it fast. And by doing it slow, you're actually giving your muscles and your brain a chance to really learn and understand what you're doing. If you do it too fast, it's hard to make those connections. So going slow now actually means you can be learning it faster.
Quick brown fox.
The quick
I
brown
forgot.
fox jumps over the lazy dog.
Okay.
There have been lots of times I forget the S on jumps. And so sometimes the fox is jumping over several dogs. The next thing, I know you might still be working on it, but I want to make sure we still cover all the parts, is what you can do now that you've lettered something, okay? So once you've lettered something, you can be thinking about, well, how can I decorate it? How can I dress it up? Because these markers come in all sorts of different colors. There's all sorts of different things you can play with it. But even when you have a black marker, I love using colored pencils, gel pens, if you want to go as fancy as paints. But even the two of the most simplest things are using a highlighter pen and just a pencil, okay? So one possibility is, I'm going to just talk about the highlighter first, okay? So here's a sample of some different ways to add color to your artwork that you made, okay? So we've got the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. And on this one pangram, I'm demonstrating 4 different ways to add color to it. The simplest way is to simply just put with a highlighter a line through the middle of the letters. Okay. And in this case of this one, I grabbed a different color highlighter and I just turned it and I made dots or squares, depending upon how you use the marker. Okay. The next row, I added color by coloring inside what are called the counters. These enclosed areas that are created by the letters is called a counter. So I colored inside of it. Now the W doesn't officially have a counter, but I just created area that I filled it in. And this technique here was used way back in the 800s with the monks who wrote the Book of Kells. So even though it's a fun and easy way to add color, it was done even on a very gorgeous, beautiful illuminated manuscript. So these are techniques that still apply in today's world with just different tools. So the third way to add color is just to kind of create a color background behind it, where, because with the highlighter, you can cover a lot of territory fairly quickly. And then the last one is to create a shadow. Now, when I create a shadow, I almost always pretend that I have a light source coming from my upper left side, which means that the lower side and the right side is going to have a little bit of shadow to it. And it's just a line of color. That's all I'm doing, is adding a line of color, not all the way around the letter, but just on one side of the letters, strokes. Okay. Now, if you don't have a highlighter nearby, you can even just take a pencil. So even if I just take a pencil and gently add a shadow, even that can make your letters look like they're in motion or that they have dimension. And it doesn't have to be precise. It's amazing what a quick stroke can do to making the letters be a little bit more interesting. You know, if you have any kind of gel pen or marker, so I'll use a little red marker here as another way. I can just put a little bit of red on the lower side and the right side of the strokes. And again, what's nice about it is that you really can't do anything wrong with it. But adding that little component of color just adds, again, it gives it energy, it gives it movement, it just makes it more interesting. Okay, so the top row has the shading with just the pencil. The second row is just a simple marker, fine point marker. You know, the next one I can just use, even if I just put it in my counters, you know, I can just add a little bit of color. I don't even have to have color everywhere, but adding some color makes the lettering pop. I don't even have to have color everywhere. Okay. All right. So what I want to do next, now that we talked about ways to kind of dress up our lettering, I want to make sure we get to the lowercase alphabet. Okay. So now we've got our the lowercase letters. And you'll notice up at the top, I've got a reminder in case it's been a while of what the classic Palmer cursive looks like. Many of us learned it in school. Even if you don't know cursive, the same principles apply. When you write a letter, on the downstroke you press down, and on the upstroke you're very light. The main difference with cursive is just the letters are connected, right? And so that's where we have these different strokes. So on the top line of our exemplar, we've got five different strokes, okay? So the first one we've been practicing, that's the float stroke. The second stroke goes from full pressure, taper, no pressure. And I'll demonstrate these once I go over them. The next stroke is no pressure, come up, taper, pressure, full pressure. And then we have two tapers. No pressure, taper, full pressure, taper, no pressure. And then the last one is just a teeny tiny pressure stroke that creates a dot. So let me just go over those components with you. Okay. Let me get a clean piece of paper so you don't have to show through. All right, so these different strokes, we're just doing the no pressure entrance stroke and exit stroke. Then we have a full pressure, and I'm going to make it big so you can kind of see it, taper, and then come out. We're practicing that on the round letters that we had done with the capitals. So you started on that one. The next is to do no pressure, taper, gradually add, I'm gradually adding pressure to, and I end on full pressure. Then we go no pressure, taper, pressure, taper, no pressure. And then the last one is we're doing a no pressure, very short pressure, and then I'm no pressure again. We use that on the R, the S, the B. So you'll see here how we put, like on the letter I, how we put those different strokes together. You'll also notice that on the I, there's a recommendation. So we've got our no pressure entrance, our full pressure to our taper. Now, when we're learning how to use these tools, it's very easy to carry that pressure into the next stroke. So one of the things I love to see students do is to totally come off the paper at the end of your taper, because that means I've fully released my pressure. And now I can do my float stroke. Because if I try doing it all in one, I might carry a lot of thickness into my float stroke. So what I love about the end of a taper is just fully lifting off. I can fully reset and go into my float stroke. One of the calligraphy styles I teach is something called copper plate. And this total release off the paper is really valuable for learning copper plate script. So that way we don't get ink coming up into the thin stroke. So you'll see this is a good reminder why you don't need to do any one letter more than once, because this first row of letters practices the same skills, right? So we've the I, the L, T, J, F, practicing that same skill. Then we have the U through P, has similar tapers. And then we've got the R through the W, has that dot pressure stroke. Okay. And then the X is its own unique brand. And of course the Z. So try I through Z, but don't do the round letters at the bottom quite yet. And if you have questions about a specific letter, just please unmute and ask. So one of the other things I want to really encourage you guys to do is move your paper, not your hand. And let me explain that a little bit. So as I write across my paper, I want to find my comfortable writing spot. All right, I call it the sweet spot. So we want to have our sweet writing spot. But if I like, say I taped my paper down, the position I would hold my pen is very different here than it is over here or down here. So I want to always be writing in about the same area of my desk. So that way, so when I talk about moving my paper, my hand is staying in a very comfortable spot, but my paper is moving as I do my lettering. Okay. All right, so let's make sure we touch all the round letters. Okay, so the round letters, if we look at the exemplar, okay, we're doing something a little bit different with the pen angle. So because there's a lot of float strokes, we've been upright with our nib and pressing down.
Excuse me, you can't see.
Oh, sorry, thank you.
Or I can't see. Okay. Can
No,
you make it in the
absolutely.
middle?
Yep.
Okay.
I need to draw like a target on my board. So we've been doing, you know, kind of working at our tip a little bit. But in order to do the round letters, I'm going to point back up to the upper left corner. So you can see that I've got a little drawing of the marker here. So we want to point upwards a little bit, so that way we get a thin before we go into our taper, full pressure taper. It's a tough stroke because as I come around, I've got to do a quick taper into a full pressure and into a taper again. And as you can see, I'm still getting chunkiness, but it's okay to go back in and you can correct. There's no problem with that. Another thing to do is to do it larger. So that way you have a little bit more space to practice that taper, which is really quite challenging because you're doing a thin to a taper, full pressure to a taper in a very short distance. Okay. And we do that same skill on all these letters. So I can turn this A into a D, or I can use that same principle on the E. All right. So the main thing is that as you start those thins, you point to that upper left corner. The other thing to remember is that the brush marker is the most basic lettering tool, which means that it is going to be the hardest to get really, really precise details. Okay, so if you're finding it, this is probably the point where if you are having any challenges, just remember it's a very basic tool that does not have a lot of, it's hard to get very detailed strokes with, okay? It's not a tool that you're going to get, you know, you're not going to do a Mona Lisa with this one, okay? So just remember that if you're having a hard time with the taper on the brush, with the brush marker, it is one of the most challenging tools to get that kind of detail accuracy with. So don't be, you know, don't think it's you. It's much more likely to just be the tool, okay? This is a beginning place. It's not a precise tool, it's a beginning tool. All right, so if you've touched the whole alphabet, start working in words. You know, pick out names of family or pets or your favorite podcast, holidays, your favorite flowers, whatever your heart desires, but start working in words.
Do you have any tricks for the lowercase r? I'm really struggling.
What part of it is not working?
The thicker parts. Just the transition, I guess, I'm having issues with.
Okay, so let me.
Even if I just watch you do it a few times, I'd be happy.
Oh, absolutely. So
Thank you.
I'll also give you a couple of other options. One, unless you really want to make sure everything is cursive, you can always just do a handwritten R where you've got the full pressure and then the simple float stroke. So you can leave it as simple as that, you know. Most people are not going to notice that you switched from a printed R to a cursive R. So as I come up into a cursive R, at the top, I'm going to just press, and then I'm going to lift up. I'll come across with the thin, and then I can do a full pressure and then go into a taper. Lift up at the bottom, and then I can come into that float stroke. So float, press, thin, full press, taper, exit. Another R that's part of the script style, just to muddy the waters a little bit, starts off like an N, but then you come up into a dot, and then you exit out to have the connection to the next stroke. That one is not as common in today's writing, but the nice thing is that one letter does not change the readability of something, because most people will figure out what the word is regardless. So it's fun to have lots of different options, you know, the printed R, the cursive R, and then another alternative to the cursive R. So if I use that last one, if I did the word read, all right, so I want to just talk a little bit to make sure we touch upon what you can do with this. So you guys have a wonderful small brush pen, which again makes it very doable for small projects. Things like drawing envelopes or cards. So if, say we were to, so here's a sample with, here's just an envelope. And one of the things I love about learning and using it, the best way to get better at this is to make excuses to do something with it. So with Halloween coming up, make happy Halloween cards, or give everybody a pumpkin name for or something. But this is where, you know, and all you have to do is one technique, even on an envelope. Even if you just do one letter, here I've used initials, okay? And this is just colored pencil, adding a little bit of color to it. And then I can just handwrite the rest of the text. I don't have to do all of it in the brush. If that feels like too much to do all of it with your brush, don't do it. Just write a few letters and then write the address. I do this kind of technique a lot with my Christmas cards and with my holiday cards, where I just put a flourish or an initial or a last name, but then I use an address label for the rest of it. But it's a great way to, if I'm learning something or practicing something, envelopes are awesome to be able to just use it as a place, to practice. And to bring somebody else joy, because they appreciate the fact that your human touch, your energy has gone into this. Okay. So another idea is to just simply take an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and we can fold it in half and then fold it in half again. And I can turn this into a card. We've kind of gotten, we live in a society that tells us the only appropriate gift is something that's been purchased. And I'd really like to argue against that. The best gift is a gift that comes from you. And it doesn't need to be this fanted, printed, embossed, glittered card that came from the drugstore. It can be something that just is an 8.5 by 11 sheet with your lettering on it. Okay, so let's see here. So we've got Halloween coming up. So I'm going to just do something that says pumpkin time on here. All right. So if it's something new to you that you're not as comfortable just writing directly on your paper, you can take your pencil and you can kind of work out your spacing by sketching it in. So I'm going to just write the word pumpkin time. So I can make sure by penciling it in, I make sure that I can get it to fit, okay, on my little section. And then I can letter, and again, black and orange is perfect for a Halloween combination. You can make this say, thank you, or thinking of you, because Lord knows there's a lot of people who would so appreciate that connection or hearing from a friend. So, and the nice thing is that it's personal, it's inexpensive, you're working with what you have. So I've got it in black. If I want, I can go and erase those pencil lines, but I'm going to take this orange highlighter and let's see here. I think I'm going to create a shadow on my right side with it, with the letters. I'm certainly not an illustrator. My main thing is letters. But good thing pumpkins are pretty basic shapes, right? So now all of a sudden I can put something personal on the inside, a hello, how you doing, thinking of you, and at no difficulty, you know. And the main thing is don't compare yourself to computer. The beautiful thing is that we are not trying to be a computer. We are out there to be an individual and have something that's unique to you on it. So what kind of questions do you guys have? I've thrown a lot out at you. Well, the thing you can always do too is that so there's several things that you're having to kind of put together today. One is, writing in script, but when we write with a pencil or a pen, the pressure is even all the time. Where today we're talking about applying pressure at different points with it. So that's actually a really difficult skill. Because again, we've been doing it for decades where when we press as hard as we want, we almost get the same kind of line. So today we are having to add a really technical skill of pressing and releasing. It's very hard to do. Even when I have my calligraphy students in a class, I don't start with that pressure. We just practice the shapes of the letters. So even though, and that's the interesting thing, even though you've been writing in script for decades, it feels totally different. I saw another person kind of stretching their hand. Are you guys, your hands tired? Okay. So one of the things that I also encourage people to do is that I first got started doing calligraphy in Chicago, and I would spend hours of my day doing envelopes, which again, people were paying me to practice, which was totally awesome. Doing wedding invitations, bar bat mitzvahs, all sorts of events. But I was constantly holding my pen very tightly. And what I learned when I woke up one afternoon after a rest, my hand froze up. And I'm like, okay, I gotta figure something out as to what I can do so that way this isn't happening. And the thing I learned is we have two sets of muscles that pull in and muscles that pull out. And so it's very important when we're using those pulling in muscles that we have to exercise the opposite muscles. So if you're finding your hands tired or sore, if you're doing a lot of lettering, which would be awesome, you can get it yourself to stretch by putting a rubber band on the outside. Forgive me, I don't think I have one with me. And by putting a rubber band on the outside of my fingers and I stretch out, I'm actually exercising the opposing set of muscles. So it's a great way, even on the keyboard, you're going down like this. It's a way to stretch and exercise and create balance in your hand too. So that's maybe a little too much information, but it was a nugget that was really important for me as I started doing more and more lettering. So is anybody going to have plans to make place cards for their family, for a family dinner? Put a little happy Halloween sign on your door. Let's see here. You can even write your grocery list, all fancy now in modern calligraphy.
Could you gift tags?
Gift
Mhm.
tags is a great idea. Absolutely. Because that's the beauty of it is you can just do an initial, you
Mhm.
know, even if it's just one word, you know, take the pressure off. Just, but the main thing is don't be shy about it. Use
Right.
it. Because if all you're doing is practicing, you're going to give up. You're going to not do it. So the main thing is find ways to use it. When I was in 5th grade, after my mom knew I knew calligraphy, she's just like, great, here's the 4-H certificates that you can fill in for your fellow 4-H members. But because she kept giving me reasons to pick up the pen, I got better at it, you know? So finding projects. Projects is the best, most interesting way to practice. Cake decorating, absolutely. That's where if you have a food safe brush, like a pointed brush, forgive me, I had one here and I think it wandered off. Mine obviously has paint on it. Well, we talked about, you know, a pointed paintbrush earlier in the class, but if you have a food safe one, you can absolutely paint on top of it. I had a cake decorator take one of my classes, and her marbling on top of her cookies was as calligraphic as the letters were.
Thank you so much, Debbie. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
That was really
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.